He was a titan of Wall Street, a man who collected assets, skyscrapers, sports cars, and a beautiful wife who was the perfect silent ornament in his gilded life. Tonight, at the annual Children's Hope Foundation Gala, he decided to show off his newest acquisition, a fiery young mistress draped in scarlet silk. He walked her into the grand ballroom, a smirk playing on his lips, convinced his wife Catherine was at home, tending to their sterile, art-filled penthouse. He believed she was his most predictable, most manageable asset. But he was wrong. In a world where power is everything, he forgot one crucial rule: never underestimate the woman you've given every reason to burn your world to the ground. He thought she was at home, but she was about to become the one person he couldn't ignore. Richard Sterling lived a life curated for the pages of glossy magazines. His existence was a symphony of sharp angles and cold surfaces, the steel and glass of his downtown Manhattan office at Sterling Innovations, the polished chrome of his Rolls-Royce Cullinan, the chiseled jawline he maintained with ruthless discipline. At 45, he had the city at his feet, a kingdom built on hostile takeovers, and an unnerving ability to see weakness where others saw strength. His wife, Catherine Vance Sterling, was, in his estimation, the masterstroke of his collection. She was beautiful in a way that spoke of old money and quiet grace, a stark contrast to the loud, fleeting beauty of the women he typically pursued. She was a Vance, a name that still held a whisper of legacy in certain Bostonian circles, but a legacy Richard believed was faded and irrelevant. He had married her 10 years ago, seeing her as the ultimate accessory, a woman who could host a dinner party with effortless elegance, and then fade into the background, leaving the spotlight solely on him. For a decade, Catherine played her part to perfection. She managed their sprawling Fifth Avenue penthouse with the quiet efficiency of a museum curator. She chose the art-approved the menus and wore the couture he bought for her with a serene smile. She was a ghost in her own life, her days a structured sequence of Pilates charity lunches and appointments at Bergdorf's. Richard saw her contentment as a reflection of his own success. He had given her a life of unimaginable luxury. What more could she possibly want? He never saw the flicker of calculation in her eyes when he detailed his business triumphs, nor did he notice the books she read when he was away. Not novels, but dense tomes on market analysis, corporate law and venture capitalism. He never questioned her late-night calls with her sister, which were in reality encrypted conferences with financial advisors and lawyers in Geneva. To Richard, Catherine was beautiful, placid, and most importantly, predictable. She was his safe harbor, the one constant in his turbulent world. This complacency was what led him to Jessica Croft. Jessica was everything Catherine was not. She was 26, a junior analyst at his firm, with a rapacious ambition that mirrored his own. She was bold, brash, and looked at him with an undisguised hunger that he found intoxicating. She didn't want a quiet life. She wanted to burn bright and fast, and she saw Richard as the ultimate accelerant. Their affair had been a thrilling, reckless game for the past 6 months. He installed her in a sleek apartment in Hudson Yards, showered her with gifts from Cartier and Chanel, and paraded her at discreet, high-end restaurants where he was unlikely to encounter his own social circle. But the game was growing old. Jessica was becoming demanding, eager for a public role, a validation of her status as his chosen one. The Children's Hope Foundation Gala was the perfect opportunity. It was the premier philanthropic event of the fall season, a glittering affair held at the American Museum of Natural History. Catherine, he reasoned, despised these events. She always claimed the forced pleasantries and social climbing gave her a headache. "Darling," he'd said a week prior, loosening his tie as he strode into their cavernous living room, Catherine was arranging white orchids in a vase, her back to him. "The Children's Hope Gala is next Friday. I know how you loathe it. I told Beatrice Lowell we'd make a sizable donation, but I'll attend alone. Represent the family." Catherine had turned a small, placid smile on her face. Her grey eyes, which he once thought were merely soft, seemed to hold a depth he couldn't be bothered to explore. "Oh, Richard, that's thoughtful of you. Yes, you're right. All those flashing cameras. You handle it so much better than I do. I think I'll just have a quiet night in. Maybe finish that new biography I started." He felt a surge of triumph at her easy acquiescence. It was perfect. "I'll need to take someone from the office, of course," he added a casual lie. "For networking, young Jessica Croft from M&A. Sharp girl. It's good for her to see this side of the business." He watched her for any sign of suspicion, any crack in the serene facade. There was none. She simply nodded, turning back to her flowers. "Of course. Give Beatrice my best, and make sure you get a photo for the society pages. It's good for the firm's image." "I always do, sweetheart," he said, kissing the top of her head before heading to his study. He missed the way her hand paused just for a second over a pristine white petal. He missed the glint in her eyes, as sharp and cold as the diamonds he'd once bought her. In his study, he immediately called Jessica. "Get ready, kitten," he purred into the phone. "You're making your official debut. I'm sending a car to take you to Carolina Herrera tomorrow. Pick out something spectacular. Something red." On the other end of the line, Jessica squealed with delight. For Richard, it was a simple transaction. He was upgrading his companion for the evening, swapping out classic elegance for modern fire. He felt powerful, untouchable, the master of his universe, completely oblivious to the fact that the foundations of his kingdom were already crumbling, eroded by the quiet, patient work of the woman in the other room. The week leading up to the gala unfolded in two entirely separate realities, orbiting the same man but existing in different universes. In one reality, there was Richard and Jessica. Theirs was a world of breathless excitement and conspiratorial whispers. Richard, feeling magnanimous, had given Jessica a black Amex card and a single instruction: "Look like you belong." Jessica took the directive to heart. The trip to the Carolina Herrera boutique on Madison Avenue was like a scene from a movie she'd always dreamed of starring in. She swanned through the plush carpets, the cloying scent of perfume and money filling her senses. She chose a gown of crimson silk, a dramatic floor-sweeping affair with a plunging neckline and a slit that climbed daringly up her thigh. It was a statement piece, a dress designed to be noticed to scream for attention. "It's audacious," Richard commented when she sent him a picture from the dressing room. He could hear the nervous excitement in her voice over the phone. "Is that bad?" she asked, her voice small for the first time. "No." He chuckled. "It's perfect. You'll be my scarlet letter. A beautiful, bold secret everyone will want to know." The rest of her week was a flurry of preparations, funded by his generosity. There were appointments with a celebrity hairstylist, a makeup artist who worked with Vogue cover models, and a final fitting where the dress was tailored to cling to her every curve. She bought new shoes from Jimmy Choo and a diamond tennis bracelet from Tiffany's, a little pre-gala gift from Richard. Each night she and Richard would meet at her apartment. He'd pour them glasses of a vintage Bordeaux he had delivered from his private cellar, and she'd model her progress. He coached her on the nuances of high society, which people to charm, whose names to remember how to laugh at a joke that wasn't funny. "Beatrice Lowell, the event chair, is an old dragon," he instructed, swirling the wine in his glass. "Be polite, but don't try too hard. She can smell desperation a mile away. My main business rival Marcus Thorne will likely be there. Ignore him. He's a shark who'll try to get information out of you." "What do I say if people ask who I am?" Jessica asked, perched on a stool and looking at him with wide, adoring eyes. "You're my protégé, a rising star at my firm. I'm mentoring you," he said smoothly. "It's the perfect cover. Plausible, respectable, and it makes me look benevolent." Jessica felt a thrill run through her. She wasn't just a mistress. She was a protégé. It sounded important, official. She was being initiated into his world. She practiced her smile in the mirror, her walk, her casual, knowing laugh. She was a woman on the verge of having everything she'd ever wanted, and she was utterly blind to the fact that she was merely a prop in a play whose script she hadn't read. Meanwhile, in the other reality, Catherine's preparations were of a profoundly different nature. Her week was also a series of appointments, but they took place not in glittering boutiques, but in the hushed wood-panelled law offices of Sullivan and Cromwell, and the discreet meeting rooms of a private wealth management firm overlooking Central Park. Her wardrobe for these meetings was a uniform of quiet power, tailored trousers, silk blouses, and a trench coat that shielded her from the city's prying eyes. Her loyal assistant Grace, a sharp woman in her late 50s, who had worked for Catherine's family for decades, managed her schedule with military precision. On Tuesday, Catherine met with her legal team. The lead attorney, a formidable woman named Evelyn Reed, laid out a stack of documents nearly a foot high. "The separation of assets is complete," Evelyn stated, her voice crisp. "He has no idea about the Vance Trust. Your grandfather structured it ironclad. He can't touch a single penny. We've established the new holding companies under the VC Sterling name. They're clean, untraceable to him for now." "And the real estate?" Catherine asked, her gaze unwavering. "The Hamptons property was purchased entirely with trust funds. He has no claim. The deeds for the London flat and the Swiss chalet are already transferred. As for this penthouse," Evelyn gestured around the opulent room, "it's in his name. Let him have it. It's just a cage after all." On Wednesday, Catherine met with her financial team. They walked her through the portfolio she had been secretly building for the last 5 years. Using the formidable inheritance her grandfather had left her, a fact she had deliberately obscured from Richard, allowing him to believe her family was genteel but broke, she had made a series of incredibly shrewd investments. She had backed 3 small tech startups, 2 of which were now on the brink of unicorn status. She had diversified into biotech and renewable energy. Her net worth, independent of Richard, was staggering. It was approaching his own. "The launch of the Vance Initiative for Women in Technology is ready to go live," her chief advisor said. "The website, the press released the initial round of funding grants. It's all queued up. All we need is your final go-ahead." "Friday night?" Catherine said calmly. "At 10 p.m. Eastern Time, exactly when the gala is in full swing." Her final and most important meeting was on Thursday afternoon, a quiet tea at the Carlyle with Beatrice Lowell. Beatrice, a woman whose name commanded respect in every corner of New York society, was a dear friend of Catherine's late mother. She was one of the few people who knew the real Catherine, the brilliant strategic mind hidden behind the society wife facade. "Are you truly ready for this, my dear?" Beatrice asked, her sharp blue eyes full of concern and admiration. "Once this stone is thrown, the ripples will become a tidal wave." "I've been ready for years, Beatrice," Catherine replied, her voice steady. "He's become careless. He thinks I'm a porcelain doll on his shelf. It's time he learned that dolls can walk away, and sometimes they can tear down the whole house." Beatrice smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed her stern features. "Your mother would be so proud. The introduction is written. I'll make sure the spotlight is perfectly positioned." What will you be wearing?" For the first time that week, Catherine's thoughts turned to her attire. It was a detail, but an important one. It was a piece of armor. "I had something commissioned," she said, "from a young, independent designer. It's not a brand he would recognize." That evening, back at the penthouse, Catherine found a receipt in the pocket of one of Richard's jackets as she was sending it to the dry cleaner. It was from the Carolina Herrera boutique, a charge for an exorbitant amount. Attached was a small embossed gift card slip. The message in his familiar scrawl read, "For my star. Shine bright. Ah." She looked at the slip, her expression unreadable. She felt no anger, no jealousy. All she felt was a cold, clear certainty. She placed the receipt on his desk, right on top of a stack of papers he would have to move. A small silent message. A warning he would be too arrogant to understand. He would see it, assume it had fallen out, and think nothing of it. He was, after all, a man who only saw what he wanted to see, and he had never truly seen her at all. Her own dress was delivered while he was out. It was not red. It was a deep, majestic sapphire blue, the color of a midnight sky. Crafted from heavy Duchess satin, it was architecturally severe but profoundly elegant. It had long sleeves, a high neck, and a column silhouette that conveyed authority, not availability. It was the dress of a queen, not a mistress. As she stood before the mirror, she saw not Catherine Sterling, the millionaire's wife, but Catherine Vance, a woman about to reclaim her name, her future and her power. The air inside the Milstein Hall of Ocean Life at the American Museum of Natural History was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of powerful conversations. A colossal life-sized model of a blue whale hung suspended from the ceiling, a silent, majestic observer of the human drama unfolding below. Light projectors cast dappled water-like patterns across the walls, making it feel as though the city's elite were dining at the bottom of a magical sea. This was the Children's Hope Foundation Gala, the glittering apex of New York's philanthropic calendar. Richard Sterling made his entrance with Jessica Croft on his arm, precisely at 8 o'clock, the fashionable peak of arrival time. He was a master of such things, understanding the subtle calculus of being neither too early nor too late. He wore a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, the dark fabric seeming to absorb the light around him, making him a point of gravitational focus. Jessica was a supernova beside him. The red Carolina Herrera gown was a slash of vibrant color in the sea of elegant black, navy, and jewel tones. It clung to her, a second skin of silk that announced her presence with the subtlety of a fire alarm. Diamonds glittered at her throat and wrist, borrowed from a jeweler, courtesy of Richard for the night. Her hair was swept up in an elaborate style, and her smile was both dazzling and tight with nerves. She clutched Richard's arm, her knuckles white, feeling the weight of hundreds of judgmental eyes. "Relax," Richard murmured, his voice a low vibration against her ear. "You look magnificent. Just remember what I told you. Smile, nod, and let me do the talking." He navigated the room with the effortless grace of a predator in its natural habitat. He greeted a tech billionaire here, a senator there, clapping them on the back, his laughter booming and confident. To anyone who inquired about his companion, he used the pre-rehearsed line. "This is Jessica Croft, one of my brightest analysts at the firm. I'm convinced she's going to be running the place one day. I thought it was time she saw how the real deals are made." The line worked perfectly. The men would look at Jessica with a new appraising glint in their eyes, a mix of professional interest and personal speculation. The women would offer tight, knowing smiles, their gazes sweeping over Jessica's dress, her youth, and her proximity to Richard, drawing their own swift and accurate conclusions. Jessica felt their silent judgment like a physical chill, but Richard's confident grip on her arm was a warm anchor. She was with him. She was safe. They found their table a prime spot near the stage. It was table 7 reserved for sterling innovations. Richard held Jessica's chair for her, a public display of chivalry that made her heart flutter. He was showing her off, staking a claim. From their vantage point, they had a perfect view of the room's ecosystem. Richard pointed out the key players. "See that man with the white hair? That's Robert Miller, the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Don't stare. The woman he's with is his wife, not his mistress for once. And over there, that's Marcus Thorne." Richard's voice tightened almost imperceptibly. Marcus Thorne, his chief rival, was holding court at a nearby table, a broad, handsome man with an easy laugh that Richard knew was entirely manufactured. Marcus caught Richard's eye and gave a small, mocking salute with his champagne flute. Richard responded with a tight, dismissive nod before turning back to Jessica. "He's a peacock," Richard scoffed. "All flash, no substance. He inherited his firm. I built mine from nothing." The evening wore on. The first course, a delicate lobster salad, was served. The wine flowed freely. Jessica began to relax, emboldened by the champagne and Richard's constant presence. She started to feel like she did belong. She was here at the center of the universe, with the most powerful man in the room. She laughed a little louder, her posture a little more confident. She was playing the part, and she thought she was playing it well. Richard was pleased. His plan was working flawlessly. He had a beautiful, exciting woman on his arm. His wife was safely at home. He was demonstrating his virility, his power to take what he wanted, all under the thinnest veneer of professional mentorship. He felt a familiar, intoxicating surge of invincibility. Around 9:30, the lights dimmed slightly, and a hush fell over the crowd as Beatrice Lowell, the chairwoman of the foundation, walked to the podium on stage. She was a woman in her late 70s, draped in a simple but exquisitely tailored navy blue gown, her white hair styled in an elegant chignon. She commanded the room's attention without raising her voice. "Good evening, everyone." She began, her voice clear and resonant, carrying through the vast hall without the aid of a microphone. "Thank you all for your incredible generosity tonight. We have already raised a record-breaking sum for the children." A polite round of applause rippled through the room. Richard clapped perfunctorily, his attention already drifting. He discreetly checked his Patek Philippe watch. He was getting bored. "Tonight," Beatrice continued, "we not only celebrate our shared commitment to philanthropy, but we also have the distinct honor of celebrating a new transformative force in that world. Each year, the Foundation bestows its Beacon of Hope Award on an individual whose vision and dedication promise to create lasting change. This year, the recipient was a closely guarded secret. It is someone who has worked quietly, diligently, and without any desire for recognition. Richard leaned over to Jessica. This is usually when they give an award to some ancient fossil who's donated a library wing. He whispered, a smirk on his face. Jessica giggled, covering her mouth with her hand. This individual, Beatrice's voice grew stronger, pulling the room's focus entirely to her, reminds us that true strength is not always loud. It is not always found in the boardroom or on the trading floor. Sometimes the most powerful force for change is the one that has been consistently, systematically, and foolishly underestimated. A strange feeling, a tiny prickle of unease began to form in the pit of Richard's stomach. Beatrice's gaze seemed to sweep across the room, and for a fleeting, impossible moment, he felt as though it lingered on him. He dismissed the thought as absurd. She has spent years planning, building, and investing not for personal gain, but to create a new paradigm for empowerment, with the launch of a revolutionary new foundation dedicated to funding and mentoring female entrepreneurs in the tech sector, she is poised to change the landscape of innovation in this country. The whispers started around the room. Who was it? No one had heard of such a foundation. The secret had been kept remarkably well. Beatrice Lowell smiled, a slow, deliberate expression full of dramatic weight. He thought her world was limited to floral arrangements and social calendars. He, and perhaps many of us, saw a quiet wife, a graceful hostess. We were wrong. We saw the cover, but we never read the book. The prickle in Richard's stomach turned into a cold, sinking stone. His blood ran cold. He felt Jessica's hand on his arm, her expression confused. "What is she talking about?" she whispered. Richard didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes were locked on the stage, his mind refusing to make the connection that his gut already had. Beatrice's voice rang out clear as a bell into the stunned silence of the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my profound honor and personal delight to present this year's Beacon of Hope Award and introduce to you our guest of honor, Mrs. Catherine Vance Sterling." For a moment there was absolute silence. The name hung in the air, suspended in a collective state of disbelief. Richard Sterling felt the world tilt on its axis. Every sound in the vast hall, the clinking of distant cutlery, the whisper of silk, the thumping of his own heart seemed to amplify, and then rush away, leaving a ringing in his ears. Cotino, it was impossible. A mistake? A cruel, elaborate joke. Then the spotlight on the side of the stage flared to life, illuminating a figure standing in the wings. She walked onto the stage, not with the hesitant, retiring gait he was used to, but with a smooth, deliberate confidence that was utterly foreign. The Catherine who emerged from the shadows was someone he didn't recognize. The sapphire blue Schiaparelli gown was a statement of regal authority. It didn't plead for attention like Jessica's scarlet dress, it commanded it. Her hair was not in its usual soft chignon, but styled in sleek, elegant waves that framed a face that looked as though it were carved from marble. Her expression was serene, composed, and held a power that stunned the room into a deeper silence. A single perfectly placed piece of jewelry, a breathtaking diamond necklace that Richard had never seen before, a Vance family heirloom she had kept hidden away, rested against her collarbone, catching the light like frozen fire. The first sound was a gasp from a nearby table, followed by a ripple of frantic whispers that spread through the hall like a contagion. "Is that Sterling's wife? I thought she never came to these things. My God, look at her." Then came the flashbulbs. A handful at first, then a blinding stroboscopic onslaught. The photographers, sensing a story far more explosive than a simple charity donation, surged forward, their lenses trained on the unfolding drama. They captured it all, the vision of Catherine on stage, Beatrice Lowell beaming beside her, and most damningly, the tableau at table 7. Richard was frozen in his chair, his face a mask of slack-jawed horror. His carefully constructed world had just been detonated, and he was at ground zero. Beside him, Jessica was ashen. The vibrant color of her dress now seemed garish, desperate. All the confident champagne had given her evaporated, leaving behind the raw, terrified realization that she was catastrophically out of her depth. She was the Scarlet Woman, publicly branded, and the man who had put her in this position looked as though he'd seen a ghost. On stage, Beatrice presented Catherine with a heavy crystal award. Catherine accepted it with a graceful nod, her hands steady. She stepped up to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out over the sea of stunned faces. Her eyes scanned the room coolly, methodically, until they found Richard. For a single shattering second, their gazes locked. In her eyes, he saw no anger, no pain, no love. He saw nothing. It was the detached, dispassionate look one might give a failed investment. A problem to be liquidated. Then she looked away from him, her focus shifting to the wider audience, and began to speak. Her voice, when it came, was not the soft, hesitant murmur he was accustomed to hearing at home. It was clear, poised, and resonated with an authority no one in that room knew she possessed. "Thank you, Beatrice," she began, her tone warm yet formal. "And thank you to the Children's Hope Foundation. I am deeply honored. For a long time, I have lived a life of quiet observation, and from that vantage point, I have noticed a profound and persistent imbalance in the worlds of technology and finance. I have seen brilliant ideas dismissed and promising ventures fail not for lack of merit, but because the brilliant minds behind them were women. The room was rapt. This was not the rambling, generic acceptance speech they were expecting. This was a manifesto. We are told that ambition is a virtue in a man, but a flaw in a woman. That to be powerful, we must emulate the most ruthless aspects of the men who dominate the field. She continued, her voice gaining strength. I believe that is a false choice. I believe there is a different way to build, to innovate, and to lead. One based on collaboration, not conquest. On mentorship, not intimidation. Richard could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes darting between him and the woman on stage. He was being filleted in public, not by accusation, but by contrast. She was everything he wasn't. That is why tonight I am officially launching the Vantas Initiative, Catherine announced. Named for my mother, a woman of quiet strength and brilliant intellect, who never had the opportunities she deserved. The Vance Initiative is a venture capital fund and mentorship program with an initial endowment of $100 million. Another collective gasp swept the room. $100 million. Where on earth did Catherine get that kind of money? Richard's mind reeled. The Vance Trust, her grandfather, the stories he'd dismissed as faded family lore. It was all real. She had her own fortune, a fortune she had hidden from him for a decade. Dedicated solely to funding and supporting startups founded by women. Our mission is to seek out the overlooked, to empower the underestimated, and to fundamentally re-engineer the architecture of opportunity. She concluded her speech with a simple, powerful call to action, inviting others to join her cause. She never mentioned Richard. She didn't have to. The entire speech was an indictment of his world, his methods, his values. She had built a new kingdom right under his nose, and this gala was not an awards ceremony, it was a coronation. The applause when it came was thunderous. It was genuine, explosive, and filled with respect. The women in the room in particular were on their feet, their faces alight with inspiration. They weren't just clapping for Catherine's philanthropy. They were clapping for her audacity, for the sheer, breathtaking genius of her coup. As Catherine stepped away from the podium, Beatrice Lowell took her arm, shielding her. Marcus Thorne, Richard's rival, was one of the first to approach the stage, his face split in a wide grin of pure, unadulterated admiration and schadenfreude. He reached Catherine, shook her hand warmly, and said something that made her laugh, a genuine musical sound that cut through the noise of the room and stabbed Richard in the heart. The spell that held him broke. He had to get to her to control the narrative, to fix this. He stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "What are you doing?" Jessica hissed, grabbing his arm. Her face was pale with panic. "Richard, everyone is staring at us." He shook her off, his eyes wild. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice a low growl. He started towards the stage, shouldering his way through the crowd of well-wishers that had already formed a protective phalanx around Catherine. He was Richard Sterling. He would not be made a fool of. He would what he had no idea. He just knew he had to reclaim control. But as he got closer, a well-dressed man with an earpiece, Beatrice's private security, stepped politely but firmly into his path. "Sir, I'm afraid Mrs. Sterling is occupied at the moment." Richard stared at the man, dumbfounded. "I am her husband." The security guard's expression didn't flicker. "My instructions stand, sir. Perhaps you should return to your table." Defeated and publicly neutered, Richard could only watch as his wife, the woman he thought was a mere possession, held court surrounded by the most powerful people in the city. She was radiant, untouchable, and completely, utterly free of him. The gala descended into a fever pitch of gossip. The air, once filled with polite chatter about art auctions and summer plans in the Hamptons, now crackled with the electric current of scandal and revelation. At table 7, Jessica Croft sat alone, a pariah in scarlet silk. The few people who glanced her way did so with a mixture of pity and contempt. Richard had abandoned her, striding furiously towards the exit, barking into his phone at his driver. He had left her stranded in the smouldering crater of his life. Jessica felt a wave of nausea. Her grand debut had become her public execution. She was no longer a mysterious protégée. She was a cheap cliché, the other woman in a story that was now infinitely more interesting than she was. Gathering what little dignity she had left, she stood up her Jimmy Choo heels, sinking slightly into the plush carpet, and walked head held high towards the exit, enduring the gauntlet of whispers and stares. Her Cinderella night was over. She had left her glass slipper, her reputation, and her career prospects shattered on the ballroom floor. Richard, meanwhile, was in his Cullinan, speeding through the glittering streets of Manhattan. The city lights, which usually made him feel powerful, now seemed to mock him. He was calling Catherine's cell phone repeatedly. Each call went directly to voicemail. The recorded message, her calm, familiar voice, now sounded like a taunt. "Catherine, pick up the goddamn phone!" He roared at the recording, slamming his fist against the leather seat. "We need to talk. You have no idea what you've just done." But she did. She knew exactly what she had done. Back at the museum, Catherine was not talking to her husband. She was talking to the Wall Street Journal. A seasoned reporter sensing the real story of the night had been granted a brief exclusive interview facilitated by Beatrice. "Mrs. Sterling," the reporter asked, her pen poised. "This is an extraordinary move. The Vance initiative seems to have come out of nowhere." "Good things rarely come from nowhere, Ms. Davis," Catherine replied, her voice composed. "They are grown in silence. The initiative has been in development for over 5 years. We have already vetted and approved our first round of investments totaling $20 million, which will be announced tomorrow." The reporter's eyes widened. This wasn't just a pledge. It was a fully operational fund. Catherine was not just making a statement. She was launching an empire. "And your husband, Mr. Sterling," the reporter ventured, treading carefully. "Is he a partner in this venture?" Catherine's smile was polite, but icy. "Richard's business acumen is, of course, well known. However, the Vance initiative is entirely my own. It is funded by my family's trust and reflects my own investment philosophy. My professional life is and will remain separate." The implication was clear. Her professional life. It was a declaration of independence, so complete, so absolute, that it was tantamount to a public divorce filing. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. By the time Richard arrived back at the empty penthouse, his phone was exploding. The first calls were from his PR team, who were in a state of sheer panic. "Richard, what the hell is going on? Page 6 is already running a live blog. They have a picture of you with the girl in the red dress and another of Catherine on stage. The headline is, Sterling's switcheroo wife replaces mistress as guest of honor. Next came the business associates. A major investor from Dubai, a conservative man for whom family image was paramount, left a clipped, cold voicemail demanding an explanation. A tech CEO with whom Sterling Innovations was negotiating a major acquisition deal sent a text. "Going to have to put a pin in our talks. This is a bad look, Richard. Very messy." He stormed through the apartment, a beast in a cage of his own making. He saw the receipt for Jessica's dress still sitting on his desk, where Catherine had left it. It wasn't an oversight. It was a chess move. A piece of evidence left for him to find, to let him know that she knew that this entire public spectacle was not a spur-of-the-moment surprise, but a meticulously planned checkmate. He went to their shared walk-in closet. Her side was half empty. Her everyday clothes were gone. The expensive gowns he'd bought her, the rows of shoes, the handbags, most were still there, like the shed skin of a life she no longer wanted. She had taken only what was truly hers. In the early hours of the morning, the first articles began to hit the internet. They were brutal. The Wall Street Journal piece was a masterclass in professional journalism, focusing on the launch of the Vance Initiative and Catherine's emergence as a new titan of industry. It painted her as a brilliant strategic visionary. Forbes quickly followed suit with a think piece titled "The Ultimate Leverage: How Catherine Vance Sterling Turned Social Capital into Financial Dominance." The society pages were less kind to him. They were filled with glee, reveling in the downfall of a man who had always acted so untouchably. They printed the pictures side by side, Jessica Young beautiful, but looking cheapened and desperate in the harsh flash of the cameras, and Catherine poised, powerful, and in complete control. The contrast was devastating. Richard wasn't just a philanderer, he was a fool. He had traded a queen for a pawn, and the queen had just taken over the entire board. The final, most crushing blow came around 3 a.m. An email arrived from Evelyn Reed Catherine's attorney. The subject line was stark: legal separation. The email was brief and brutally efficient. It informed him that divorce proceedings were being initiated, citing irreconcilable differences. It detailed the assets that were hers alone, a list so extensive it made his head spin. The Hamptons estate, the London flat properties he had always thought of as theirs, but had been purchased through her trust. It stated that as of that moment, he was to have no contact with Catherine, and that all future communication must go through their respective legal teams. Attached was a single file, a photo. It was a candid shot of him and Jessica, taken weeks ago at a discreet restaurant, laughing together, his hand resting high on her leg. The photo was time-stamped. It had been taken by a private investigator. She had been gathering evidence for months, perhaps years. Her quietness had not been contentment. It had been surveillance. Her placid smile had not been serene. It had been strategic. He had been living in a house of cards, and he had never even seen the woman holding the deck. He sank into his leather office chair, the city lights a blur through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and felt the chilling, unfamiliar sensation of total and utter defeat. The empire he had built had not been taken from him by a rival like Marcus Thorne. It had been shattered from within by the one person he had never even considered a player in the game. The days that followed the gala were a slow-motion demolition of Richard Sterling's life. The world which had once seemed to revolve around him now spun in a new orbit with Catherine Vance at its center. At Sterling Innovations, the atmosphere was funereal. The story was on every screen, the talk of every trading floor. Richard's reputation as a shrewd, infallible operator was in tatters. How could a man so easily and publicly duped by his own wife be trusted to foresee market trends or navigate complex negotiations? The deal with the tech company officially fell through. Marcus Thorne, smelling blood in the water, immediately swooped in, poaching 2 of Richard's top executives and making a play for one of his key clients. Richard's attempts at damage control were futile. He was a walking punchline, a meme, a cautionary tale told over expensive lunches he was no longer invited to. He fired Jessica Croft. Her dismissal was cold and impersonal, an email from HR citing a breach of the company's code of conduct. Her office was packed into a box and left with the front desk. When she tried to call Richard, her number was blocked. In a single night, she had lost her job, her benefactor, and any hope of a future in the cutthroat world of New York finance. She became a ghost, disappearing back into the anonymity from which she had so desperately wanted to escape. Richard, meanwhile, rattled around the cavernous penthouse, a king deposed from his throne. The silence was deafening. The white orchids Catherine had so carefully arranged began to wilt their drooping heads, a perfect metaphor for his own fallen state. The staff, once deferential, now moved around him with averted eyes and whispered conversations. He was no longer the master of the house. He was just a temporary occupant, awaiting eviction. Catherine's world, in stark contrast, was one of explosive growth and burgeoning influence. The headquarters of the Vance Initiative, located in a chic, light-filled loft in the meatpacking district, was a hive of activity. The $100 million endowment had been a conservative opening bid. In the wake of the Gala, offers of partnership and investment flooded in. Powerful women, CEOs, venture capitalists, established philanthropists, all wanted to be a part of what Catherine was building. Beatrice Lowell joined her board of directors, lending her immense credibility and network to the cause. The press couldn't get enough of her. She was the story of the season. She gave a select few interviews, always steering the conversation away from her personal life and towards her professional mission. She was articulate, passionate, and formidably intelligent. The business world, which had known her only as Richard Sterling's pretty wife, was now forced to reckon with Catherine Vance, the brilliant strategist. A month after the gala, the 2 sides met in their lawyers' offices to begin the divorce settlement. The conference room was large and impersonal, with a long mahogany table that served as a polished no-man's land. Richard arrived first looking haggard. He had lost weight, and his expensive suit seemed to hang off his frame. He was flanked by a team of aggressive, pin-striped lawyers who radiated belligerence. Catherine arrived exactly on time, accompanied only by Evelyn Reed. She wore a simple but impeccably tailored cream-colored dress. She looked serene, healthy, and completely in command. She nodded a curt professional acknowledgement in Richard's direction and took her seat without a word. Richard's lawyers came out swinging, as he had instructed. They contested the prenuptial agreement. They made noise about emotional distress. They attempted to lay claim to a portion of the Vance Initiative, arguing that her financial acumen had been honed through her exposure to Mr. Sterling's business. Evelyn Reed listened patiently, her expression impassive. When they had finished their blustering, she opened her briefcase and slid a slim file across the table. "Before we proceed," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "I believe my client has a counteroffer." Richard's lead attorney opened the file. Inside was a series of damning documents. There were the private investigators' reports detailing Richard's affair with Jessica in meticulous, humiliating detail. There were bank statements showing the extravagant gifts, the rent on the Hudson Yards apartment, all paid for, from accounts that could be argued as marital assets. But that wasn't the worst of it. The final documents were sworn affidavits from 2 former female employees of Sterling Innovations. Both detailed instances of inappropriate advances from Richard, veiled threats to their careers if they didn't comply, and a hostile work environment. They were sealed non-disclosure agreements, already signed by the women, in exchange for generous severance packages from the Vance Initiative. These women were prepared to go public, Evelyn stated calmly. My client, however, felt that a protracted and ugly media battle would be unseemly. She persuaded them that their stories would be better served as leverage for a quiet, swift resolution. She has also offered them both senior positions at one of her new portfolio companies. Richard stared at Catherine, aghast. She had not only outmaneuvered him, she had weaponized his own transgressions against him with surgical precision. She hadn't just been planning a divorce. She'd been planning a war and had won it before he even knew it had begun. "What do you want?" he finally choked out, speaking directly to her for the first time. Catherine met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I want what is mine, Richard. Nothing more, nothing less. The Vance assets are mine. The Hamptons property is mine. I will not touch Sterling Innovations or your personal holdings. I want a clean break. Sign the papers, and those affidavits remain sealed forever. Contest this, and they will be delivered to the New York Times by courier this afternoon." Richard's lawyers were pale. They knew a checkmate when they saw one. The scandal of the affair was one thing. A Me Too scandal would utterly destroy what was left of his company and his name. He looked across the table at the woman he had lived with for 10 years, the woman he thought he knew he owned. He had seen her as a beautiful, fragile piece of porcelain. He realized now that she was made of steel. "Sign the papers," he said to his lawyer, his voice a hoarse whisper. It was the only move he had left. He was no longer a king, not even a player. He was just a man trying to salvage a few scorched pieces from the ruins of his former life. 6 months later, spring had arrived in New York City, painting the trees in Central Park with strokes of vibrant green. The city had moved on as it always does. The Sterling scandal was now old news, a fossilized piece of gossip replaced by newer, fresher dramas. But the consequences of that night remained, having permanently altered the landscape of 2 lives. Richard Sterling was a diminished figure. He had avoided complete ruin, but the cost had been immense. He sold the Fifth Avenue penthouse, its cavernous rooms a constant reminder of his humiliation. He moved to a smaller, more modern apartment in a less fashionable part of town. His firm Sterling Innovations survived, but it was wounded. He'd lost prestige clients and the aura of invincibility that had been his greatest asset. He was still a rich man, but he was no longer a powerful one. Power, he was learning, was far more than money. It was respect, and he had lost that entirely. He sometimes saw her name in the financial press or on society websites. Catherine Vance. She had dropped the Sterling almost immediately, a public amputation of their shared past. Each mention was a fresh twist of the knife. Catherine Vance's tech fund closes another record-breaking deal. Catherine Vance, named a Titan of Tomorrow by Fortune magazine. He would study her pictures. She looked different now, or perhaps he was just seeing her clearly for the first time. The quiet serenity had been replaced by a vibrant confidence. She didn't look angry or vengeful, just busy, thriving, building. His final encounter with her was indirect, a ghost of an interaction. He was at a quiet bar downtown, nursing a scotch, when he saw Marcus Thorne walk in. Thorne, whose own company was flourishing in the vacuum Richard had left, saw him, and to Richard's surprise, approached his table. "Sterling." Thorne said, his tone not triumphant, but strangely neutral. Richard just grunted in response. "You know," Thorne said, swirling the ice in his own glass, "I spent years trying to figure out how to beat you. I studied your deals, your tactics. I always thought your weakness was your arrogance." He paused, taking a sip. "I was wrong. Your weakness was your blindness. You were married to the most brilliant strategist I've ever met, and you had her organizing your dinner parties." Thorne shook his head, a small, almost pitying smile on his face, and walked away, leaving Richard alone with the bitter truth of his words. Catherine's life was the inverse of his. The Vance initiative was a resounding success. It was more than a fund. It was a movement. She had become a sought-after speaker, a mentor to a new generation of female leaders. Her work was her passion, and it filled her days with purpose. She sat in her office, the late afternoon sun streaming through the large industrial windows overlooking the Hudson River. The space was minimalist, but warm, filled with books and the vibrant art of female artists she was now collecting. Grace, her steadfast assistant, came in with a cup of tea. "The final divorce decree came through this morning," Grace said, quietly placing the cup on the desk. "It's officially done." Catherine looked up from her laptop, a small, thoughtful smile playing on her lips. She felt no surge of victory, no lingering bitterness. She simply felt closure. "Thank you, Grace." "A reporter from Forbes is on the line," Grace added. "They're doing a 'Where are they now?' follow-up to their 'Titans of Tomorrow' piece. She wants to ask you about your transformation." Catherine considered the word. Transformation. It implied she had changed from one thing into another, a caterpillar into a butterfly. It wasn't accurate. "Put her through," Catherine said. She picked up the phone. "Catherine Vance speaking." The reporter's voice was bright and enthusiastic. "Ms. Vance, thank you for your time. I wanted to start by asking about your incredible journey. People talk about your transformation from a quiet society wife to a powerhouse CEO. Can you tell me what that felt like?" Catherine leaned back in her chair, gazing out at the river, at the endless flow of water heading towards the open sea. "That's a common misconception," she said, her voice calm and clear, the voice of a woman who knew exactly who she was. It wasn't a transformation. It was an unveiling. "I was always this person. The world, and one man in particular, just never bothered to look closely enough to see it. This isn't a new chapter. I'm not the woman he created, or the woman who reacted to him. I am simply and finally the woman I have always been, writing a story that was never his to begin with." And so Catherine's story became a legend, whispered in boardrooms, and at charity galas, a testament to the fact that the greatest power often lies in being underestimated. Richard Sterling became a ghost of his former self, a lesson in arrogance, while Catherine Vance built an empire on the foundations of his neglect. Her victory wasn't just in the money she made or the company she built. It was in the reclaiming of her own name, her own story. What did you think of Catherine's epic power move? Was it cold-hearted revenge or a brilliant act of self-liberation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If you were captivated by this story of quiet strength and spectacular vindication, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with anyone who loves a story where the underdog doesn't just win, they change the entire game. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss another tale of justice, intrigue, and the incredible power that lies within us all. Thank you for listening.